as a leader, if you're really good at prioritizing, then you've become a more resourceful leader. Because ideally, you want to make sure as an individual, and then certainly the company overall, you want to focus the time, the energy, the attention on like 2 or 3 things. As soon as you increase it to like even 5 or 7 things or 15 things, like you basically have set everyone, yourself up and everyone else up for failure, right?
Yeah.
Leaders can do a few things very, very well with speed and with quality. But as soon as you put too much on their plate, one of those is going to suffer either speed or quality.
Welcome back to the Eric Ries Show. Today we discuss what it takes to build a company that reshapes an entire, highly regulated industry. My guest is Iman Abuzeid, the co-founder and CEO of Incredible Health, a platform that has revolutionized how healthcare systems hire nurses. In just a few years, Incredible Health has grown to serve over 1 million nurses in 1,500 hospitals and healthcare systems, including household names like Cedars-Sinai, Kaiser Permanente, and HCA Healthcare, and along the way, build a substantial enterprise doing it. In this episode, we talk about how Iman tackled one of healthcare's biggest workforce challenges with a contrarian approach. We talk about the lessons she's learned scaling a mission-driven company into a platform that touches millions of lives, and through them, tens of millions more. And most importantly, why being unapologetically focused on values has been key to the company's success. If you've ever wondered how to disrupt a legacy industry, navigate hypergrowth, or align purpose with profit, this conversation will change how you think about leadership and impact. I hope you enjoy my conversation with Iman Abuzeid.
All right, let me start by just saying thank you for taking the time to come on and talk to me.
Well, thank you so much for having me.
I appreciate it. Tell me what Incredible Health does.
So Incredible Health is a career marketplace for healthcare workers. Our vision is to help healthcare professionals live better lives, and our mission is to help healthcare professionals find and do their best work. What that means is hospitals and health systems, they use our software to hire nurses in permanent roles in 20 days or less. And there's 3 unique things about our product. Number 1 is that employers apply to the nurses instead of the other way around. We've also automated the screening and the matching of the talent as well, and the employers. And the end result of that is hiring that happens in 20 days or less. We also save at least $5 million for each hospital we work with. And then we also help nurses relocate and expand their opportunities and advance their careers and get paid more too.
Say a few words about why you started the company in the first place.
I'm an MD by background. I've been in software for the last 10 years of my career. I believe healthcare workers are some of the most overworked and underappreciated workers in this country. And so we want to do whatever we can to delight users and to delight healthcare workers. We started this company because a lot of my family members and friends are doctors and surgeons. They often complain about understaffing. At the same time, my co-founder, Roman Portlock, he comes from a family of nurses, and they're saying they're experienced and qualified, and they apply to 10 places, and they usually don't even hear back. And so once we started to dig into it, we realized the tools, the processes, the technology, like not a lot has changed in the last 20 years in healthcare hiring. And we figured there has to be a better way. And we're really committed to this industry. I mean, healthcare is the biggest labor sector in the country by number of workers. And it's also the industry with the biggest shortages as well.
What's your long-term vision for Incredible Health?
Our long-term vision is to define a new category, right? Then the category is career marketplace for healthcare workers. And we're aiming to be the market leaders in healthcare labor. Our goal is to IPO, eventually go public. And so we are, it's an ambitious company, and we want to build a legendary standalone company.
This episode is brought to you by Vanta. If you're a startup founder, then product market fit is obviously your number 1 priority. But to land bigger customers, you also need security compliance. And obtaining your SOC 2 or ISO 27001 certification can open those big doors. But they take time and energy, pulling you away from building and shipping. That's where Vanta comes in. Vanta is the all-in-one compliance solution helping startups get audit ready and build a strong security foundation quickly and painlessly. Through the platform, access trusted experts to build your program, auditors to get you through audits quickly, and a marketplace for essentials like pen testing. So, whether you're closing your first deal or gearing up for growth, Vanta makes compliance easy. Join over 8,000 companies, including many Y Combinator and Techstar startups who trust Vanta. Simplify compliance and get $1,000 off at vanta.com/Eric. That's VANTA.com/Eric.
I was raised from a family of doctors. And so in my family, growing up as a child, the power of nurses was drilled into me at a young age. And of course, the power of, the healthcare profession and the ways in which being a healer is such a meaningful part of people's lives. And I'm curious for you, why did you decide to become a doctor? What was your original motivation, and how did you wind up doing that?
Yeah, so I decided to go to medical school because a lot of people in my family were doctors. I wish it was something a little more, more
I can so
in
relate.
depth
Oh my
than that.
God. Yeah.
But yeah, my dad's a surgeon, so are my older brothers, and I just figured, oh, okay, this is what people do, right? And so that's actually how I ended up going to medical school. Now, honestly, that's probably not a good way to decide what to do with your career because as soon as I finished medical school, I went on and did other things, which is not practicing clinical medicine. So yeah, I have sort of a little bit of a non-traditional route.
Why didn't you want to practice traditional medicine?
Look, I think working as a clinician or as a healthcare worker is an amazing career. And, many years later, I started Incredible Health that has a vision of helping healthcare professionals live better lives. So I do truly believe that. But for me, I really wanted to have an impact on a larger scale. And being a healthcare worker and clinical medicine in general is great, but you are seeing patients one at a time, usually. And whereas, when eventually I got into software, and with software, you can have an impact on an entire industry, and you can work with hundreds of thousands or millions of users, and the impact is just like at a much bigger scale.
How did you make that transition from medicine into software?
Yeah, so it was not straightforward at all. So I finished medical school. I end up moving to New York City. I work in management consulting at Booz Allen and then at McKinsey. I'm doing like hospital operations and strategy during my time in
Mm-hmm.
management consulting, so I'm getting more exposed to business. I decide to do my MBA. I go to business school because I just want to get like foundational knowledge of business. So move to Philadelphia, go to Wharton. I get even more exposed to entrepreneurs there. And then when finishing up business school, decide to move to the San Francisco Bay Area because it is, in my opinion, I know it's controversial now, but it is the tech capital of the world
Oh
and one of
yeah.
the most amazing places you can be in if you're into startups and into software. But the truth is, like, I didn't know much about software at the time when I moved to the Bay Area. So I joined an early stage healthcare technology company as a product manager. That's where I learned to work with software engineers and data
Mhm.
scientists and designers and what it takes to actually build software and grow it. And so did that for a couple of years before founding Incredible Health.
What was it like making that transition into the tech world, when you still saw it with fresh eyes?
Um, Honestly, it was super exciting. Like, I just a little bit about my background. Like both my grandfathers are entrepreneurs in Sudan. I'm originally from Sudan. I grew up outside of the U.S. I immigrated to the U.S. when I was 24 years old, and I think I just have this belief that entrepreneurship is like the epitome of what you can do with your career in business. Um, and then combine that with the magic of software and the scalability of it, and I just think it's the coolest thing, honestly. So I still have that level of optimism even now, 10 years later. But yeah, I'm super into tech and software.
So you joined a healthcare startup. Do you want to say a little bit about what it did, or how it went?
Yeah, it was a company called AliveCor. It was a device and an app and a mobile app that patients use to measure their heart rhythm, and so it helps patients with arrhythmias and so on.
Hmm.
And it was early stage. It was venture backed, and I worked with a very talented group of engineers and data scientists and designers, and that's how I got my exposure and my initial training in product.
What happened next?
So I work with a very talented software engineer. His name is Rome Portlock, and we leave AliveCor to found to start our own business. And Rome is a software engineer. He went to MIT. He's a total whiz, and he's been my business partner ever since. And so we left and started working on an idea. And honestly, the initial idea didn't even work. Like, we worked on it for about a year, and we had a product that was live and we had some revenue, but we were really, really struggling with getting it to grow. And actually we end up pivoting right to the idea, which
Hmm.
is now Incredible Health. um, and so that was like a whole process in and of itself. And so we decided to start Incredible Health, and a lot of my family members and friends are doctors and surgeons, and they're often complaining about understaffing. And then at the same time, Rome's family has many nurses, and they were saying, I'm experienced and I'm qualified, and I apply to 10 different places, and I usually don't even hear back. And we were like, okay, this doesn't make any sense, right? So we started to dig into it. And, healthcare is the biggest labor sector in the country by number of workers. And it's also the industry with the biggest labor shortages too. And so we were like, how come everyone should be hired really fast, right? Given the labor supply, the supply and demand dynamics and the large labor shortages. But when we dug into it, we realized like the processes, the tools, the technology, like nothing's really changed in healthcare hiring in over 20 years. And we just figured there has to be an easier way. So that's how this all started.
Talk a little bit about what it was like to have to do the pivot. Like, how did you know it was time, and how did you pick Incredible Health as the new direction?
Yeah. So, going through the pivot, I think hands down was the most stressful period of building this company. I've been working on Incredible Health for 7 years, and that by far was the number one, most stressful. We were in an accelerator together. Actually, we were Roman and I were in an accelerator called NFX, which is now just a seed and Series A fund, and working with a great group of partners there, like James Currier, Pete Flint,
shout out to James.
Yeah, shout out to James. And so when we joined that accelerator we joined them with one idea, and we were looking at our numbers and just looking at the whole thing overall, and we're like, hey, we're like really struggling with growing this, and it's probably better to change ideas. And so we actually went through like a pretty thorough ideation process, with the support of James and Pete and Gigi, and I learned a lot about ideation. And I think in hindsight, like I think majority of founders don't do ideation very well. Which is, so.
Dig into that. What do people do wrong, and what did you learn that you wish you'd known then?
And so I learned to just start looking at ideas like an investor. And I know that's like, doesn't sound, like that savvy, right? Or that fun, but that's essentially what I learned. And so what I mean by that is, when we tried to come up with multiple business ideas, based on problems of that are in our life or our family members' lives or our friends' lives or whatever. And then we applied filters, right? And so the filters are market size. Like ideally, you're pursuing an idea that's in a multi-billion-dollar or multi-trillion-dollar industry, where even if you capture 1%, it's still a massive company. Then we also looked at another filter we looked at was competition. So ideally, you don't want to go into something that has an enormous number of competitors, because then it's going to be so hard to differentiate. Now, of course, there's not going to be zero competitors, but ideally, you just want like 10 or 20, like some public companies, some startups, but like not much more than that. And then finally, the third filter is your unique insight. Like, what have you come up with that's at least 10x better than what's already out there? And better can mean, faster, cheaper, or more compliant, whatever it is, right? And so when we think about like the best startup ideas of our generation, like, I mean, you can argue Uber is like literally 100 times better than what was already out there, than status quo, right? So ideally, you can come up with a unique insight where what you've come up with is truly, truly a game changer and much, much better than the status quo. Now, obviously, we didn't come, once you apply these filters to your ideas, like your ideas go from like 100 to like 10, right? Because like not everything's going to fit all that criteria. So that's a little bit just about the ideation exercise that we went through.
Did you find as you were going through that process that some of the ideas that kind of fit the filter you just weren't very excited about? Like, or did you apply a kind of a passion, like sense of rightness filter from the very beginning?
Honestly, we added the passion piece towards the end, actually. It's because we didn't want to prematurely dismiss ideas over something like passion, which can be a little bit, I don't know, ambiguous or fluid. We wanted to be as sort of like objective and rational or as we can about it initially. But then, of course, like after that, once you're, coming down to the final set and you're starting to go deep on market research and customer research and so on, there is a thing called founder market fit, right? Like you want to make sure that your background, your interests, what you care about, your purpose, right, fits with the idea that you're pursuing.
So what was it like? You did this pivot, you had investors, you had to convince them that this is the new direction. you made the decision. What was like the next day? Then what did you do?
I mean, it was, we had to hustle. We had to move really quickly because we had a demo day in like 6 weeks, and all we had was an idea,
Oh, you
right?
have a deadline. So helpful.
We had a deadline, exactly. And at this point, 6 weeks before demo day, there's like no MVP, there's no users, there's like nothing, right? So yeah, I remember Rome and I just worked like crazy for the next, I mean, we're still working a lot, but that was like a ton, like we were working an enormous amount to just be ready for demo day. And that's where we kicked off our seed fundraising. And, the seed round was led by James Joaquin at Obvious Ventures. And honestly, he invested in us when we were just two co-founders. We had no employees. And it was just a vision at that point. Sure, we had the basics of an MVP. We had our first few users. We had a letter of intent. So there was like a little bit of stuff, but not a whole lot when he wrote that $2 million check.
Well, that's such the sign of a high quality investor to have the conviction to make a bet like that when it's really very, very early. And James, he and I have known each other a really long time, and he has this vision of investing in companies he calls world positive. Mm-hmm. That when they profit, they create social change, as a side effect, not as kind of a separate virtue signaling exercise, but core to the thing itself. And I'm curious, what do you see as the world positive part of this business?
Yeah. So I love James Joaquin's thesis and Obvious Ventures thesis around world positive companies. And I'm a big believer in that you can have profit and purpose at the same time. And there's so many amazing companies of our times that fit that, like Patagonia, and there's just so many examples. For us at Incredible Health, we have this vision of helping healthcare professionals live better lives, and the mission is to help healthcare professionals find and do their best work. And just at a deeply personal level, I believe that healthcare workers are some of the most overworked and underappreciated workers in this country, and we want to do whatever we can to give them a delightful experience. So that's that's the purpose piece of this. Now, are there other benefits to our platform? Like, of course, we're expanding opportunities for healthcare workers. We're helping them get paid more. We're helping them relocate to other parts of the country. We're helping them advance their skills and pursue roles in a variety of specialties. And then for the hospitals, we're helping them deliver care, right? Like their product is care, and they need staff to deliver the care. And when you're understaffed, you're either spending on temporary labor, which is usually very expensive and not great for a low margin business like a hospital, and not great for the quality of care either. And so there's a lot of financial pressures around labor as well for a hospital. So with Incredible Health, we're able to hire permanent nurses faster so they can reduce their use of temporary labor, which leads to not just cost savings, but also a higher quality of care.
I always found it strange that in the healthcare profession, there's not as much of an emphasis on healing as you would think. And in particular, the people that work in the system are often treated like disposable commodities, by relatively heartless administrators, even when the system is nominally a nonprofit or some kind of, you would think, exemplar of the kind of system that would treat people well. Why do you think that is?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's sort of, healthcare in the US has like a bit of a dichotomy, right? Like all of these organizations that we work with, I mean, we work with huge health systems like HCA and Tenet. We work with regional systems like Kaiser Permanente and Baylor Scott and White. We work with academic medical centers, right? Like Johns Hopkins and NYU and so on. All of them have tremendous missions, right? They're all world positive, right? Mm-hmm. As well. Now the thing we all have to remember is that healthcare is also an industry and it's a business. And so the key is that you got to deliver high quality care, and you need to pursue this lofty mission and deliver care for your communities. But you got to do it in a way that's financially sustainable as well. And so that's where the friction gets introduced, right? Mm-hmm. And where even the friction between the healthcare workers and the administrators gets introduced. That I believe the organizations can do both. And in fact, we have, being a two-sided marketplace with an enormous data sets, right? We actually have a lot of evidence that there are many organizations that can do both, right? So for example, we have hospitals and health system leaders that are very focused on career advancement for nurses, right? or very focused on enabling flexible scheduling for nurses. Or so there are like heavy investments going on in that workforce. But yeah, it's probably moving slower than what the healthcare workers would ideally want.
Why is there such a shortage of labor in this market?
The bottlenecks that are leading to the shortage are multiple. So I'd love to just like walk through them. So on the whole is our population is aging, right? And so the US population is putting more and more strain on the US healthcare system because it's aging, because the population is aging. And so we as a country, we've not done an amazing job of increasing the number of healthcare workers to meet that demand. Now, to be clear, we have increased the number of healthcare workers, but just not enough to meet that demand.
Right.
So that is why we're on track to be 1 million US nurses short. Nursing is literally the number one biggest labor shortage in the United States right now. And if you look at the top 10, like 8 of the 10 are in healthcare, right? And so there is interest from Americans to go into nursing school, for example, and to become healthcare workers, because honestly, it's a stable profession. There's the job security is awesome. The pay rates are generally quite good for many of the professions, but there's a huge bottleneck when it comes to educating them. So there's a huge bottleneck just with nursing schools. Like they have tens of thousands of applicants on wait lists who cannot enter the nursing school because the nursing school does not have enough faculty, right? And so there's a bottleneck going on there. There's another bottleneck after nursing school when it comes to training the professionals, because there aren't enough training programs throughout the US to get specialized, like similar to what doctors do with residencies. And then there's another bottleneck happening at the end of their careers with retirement, right? This is an aging workforce as well. And so in the next 5 years, 20% of nurses are expected to retire, right? So we have another challenge going on there where we're losing people at the end of their careers too. So all of that in combination is just leading to a very difficult shortage that we're struggling to get out of as a country.
Have you thought about whether Incredible Health has a role to play in expanding the supply of nurses, not just making the match, but really like investing in helping more people get those skills?
Yes, absolutely. So the way we think about the experience for the nurses and for healthcare workers is that this Incredible Health is not just the place where you find a job, it's the place where you manage your career, right? And so we have many services and tools that are free, right, for healthcare workers and for nurses. For example, we offer continuing education that's available to every single nurse in the country that's accredited in all 50 states. We also have salary estimators, so you can gauge what your salary could be in different locations and in different specialties. We also have a community where, like a Quora for nurses, where they can ask each other for advice. And so we do want to play a role in being the solution here. And we think of that from a product standpoint, we want to have a relationship with the nurse for their entire career, from the time they're thinking about entering nursing school all the way until retirement.
So take me back to that original MVP. Now the product seems like it does so much, and you're really expanding the ways in which you can take care of the people on your platform. But the MVP, of course, didn't have all that. Like, what was in it at that time, and how did you decide kind of which features to keep and what to let go, just as you were rushing to get it ready?
Yeah. So MVPs and building minimum viable products are honestly, it's both an art and a science. It's not just especially in the early days, you are also relying on intuition and other factors, because frankly, you don't have enough data to do A/B tests and other fancy stuff that you do later, right? So for us, Roman and I sat down and thought through what is absolutely required to make this thing work. The absolute minimum.
And what was it? What was the absolute minimum?
It didn't look pretty. The design wasn't all fancy and nice. It enabled nurses to sign up and to create a profile. Matching in the early days was done manually. It wasn't done algorithmically. Screening was done manually in those days, not automatically like today. So just ensuring that both users can join a web application and that they can interact, an interview request can be sent, that was the MVP. I think Rome built it in 5 weeks or something like that.
When did you get your first nurse a job?
Oh, it was in 2017, the year we were founded. So it happened probably 4 or 5 months after that MVP was built. That's when the first nurse was hired, and I still remember that day. Like we were like, "Oh my god, it works!" So that was really exciting. Before that, we had gotten our first nurses signed up, we had gotten our first hospitals signed up, etc. But like to see the actual final,
But
like,
it took time
happen,
to actually make the match.
yeah,
Yeah. That's such a classic mistake people make in two-sided marketplace is they focus so much on the features of the product, not really understanding that the product is the match that you make between the two sides. So if you have great features and the design is beautiful and it looks awesome and whatever, none of that matters at all if, people can't actually transact with each other and they're willing to put up with so much missing if they can actually get that match to happen because these marketplaces are so powerful.
That's exactly right. Yeah, exactly.
Okay, so from that first match in 2017, I think I heard you say that you have 1 million nurses on the platform. Is that true?
Yes, we have 1 million US nurses on the platform. So 1 in 3 nurses in the US uses Incredible Health to manage their careers. And then we have 1,500 US hospitals on the platform as well. So this is now 7 years from founding. Yeah.
Well, congratulations, first of all.
Thank you.
That's just incredible scale. And, in the recurring theme in these interviews of the overnight success, 10 years in the making, I'm sure it was just a snap of your fingers from from act 1 of the play when you did the MVP, fast forward through the photo montage and boom, here you are with this incredible success. I'm curious, when you look back on it now, I'm sure now when people join the company, everything seems inevitable. Of course, it was going to work out, but there must have been those moments, even after the pivot, where you weren't sure when it didn't seem right. Like, talk us through how you got through those, that trough of despair part of the journey. And what was your North Star? Like, what did you keep coming back to when you weren't sure it was going to work?
Yeah, it's amazing question. Look, just to be clear to the audience, Eric's being sarcastic. Okay, there's no such thing as overnight successes, right? Like, this is, even on the outside, you see like it looks like sunshine and rainbows, and there's press, and there's all these announcements and so on. But inside, I mean, this is like a lot. Like, company building is like blood, sweat, and tears. Like it's an enormous amount of effort and work. A lot of things go wrong. When I think about the many, many things that went wrong, and I'm talking about product issues and people issues and customer issues and market issues and throw a pandemic in there. Like a lot of things happened over the last 7 years. And I think about what got us through all of that. Probably the number one is resilience and determination. I genuinely believe that's like the number one trait an entrepreneur needs to have. Just like, don't quit. The other piece in my case that was very helpful was remembering the purpose of the company, right? We're pursuing a vision and mission where it's a very ambitious company. We're trying to transform the way this industry operates and the way we delight healthcare workers. Like, healthcare workers are not used to delightful products and delightful experiences. If we can just be the one product company out there that's doing that for them, then that's great. I also so remembering the impact that you're having has been really important. Like, I still read our 5-star. We have like 5,000 plus 5-star reviews across like Facebook, Google, the App Store, etc. Like, I still read those like when they come in. It feels great, right? You're having a real impact. And then finally, just like make sure you have an awesome team around you. Like, I have a fantastic co-founder and CTO. And I have a really strong leadership team, and I love our engineers, and there's so many amazing team members here now that I get a lot of energy from working with talented, motivated, very smart people, and problem solving with them is fun, right? So it's those 3 things that I always try to keep in mind. Like, grit and determination matters, the purpose and the impact you're having matters, and let's work with awesome people because that can get you through a lot too.
How big is the company now?
We're 160 team members. Yeah.
That's actually kind of small for $1 billion company.
It is.
I feel like that's very much the trend now. People are trying to think about not how big companies can be, but how do we grow our impact without growing the size of the team? How have you been able to create so much value with such a small team?
Yeah, I've generally been a CEO that sort of leans into capital efficiency. And this is before capital efficiency was a trend. So,
Yeah, I'm sure in
overnight.
2021, people thought that was crazy.
Exactly.
Back
Honestly,
in fashion now.
before 2021, everyone thought it was crazy.
Mm-hmm.
It was a very unpopular thing to do, is to run the company in a capital efficient manner.
Well,
Um,
explain what that was like, actually. I think there's a lot of people that find it hard to believe that investors wouldn't want capital efficiency. And
yeah.
actually, it's kind
So
of rare. So yeah, explain, just like talk about what that was like to be advocating for a style of company building that was out of fashion at the time. And what are some of the crazy things people said to you?
yeah.
And
So
how
look,
would it have turned out if you'd listened to them?
Eric and I are both operating in a community of venture backed companies and venture capitalists, right? Usually, in our little like world, um, it is normal to raise capital and to be very unprofitable, and to focus on things like your growth rate and your market share before thinking about profitability. And that was definitely the trend before. That was like what we were all surrounded by before 2021. I never really fully bought into that. Okay, so like, don't get me wrong. The company had very very high growth rates, and we were pursuing a large market size. It is venture backed, etc. But there were a few things that we always cared about. Like, for example, our unit economics. Like, every time there's a transaction, make sure that you're making a profit per transaction. And that saying something as simple as that was like unpopular, right? So unit economics mattered. Trying to pushing, encouraging the team, and I'm talking about culture now, encouraging the team to deliver results, even before growing headcount dramatically, is something that we pushed for throughout the years as well.
How did you do that? That's a hard one.
It's a very hard one. There's so many different things we did. For example, Rome made a decision early on to hire an engineering team that was primarily senior engineers, right? So that meant smaller headcount of an engineering team, but all are pretty experienced. That meant the productivity impact of each individual was high, right? We did the same kind of decision making with our sales team, all experienced enterprise sales team. No one knew out of college, et cetera, right? And so that led to impact per team member was higher because of who you were hiring. Yeah, that was like one approach. Another approach was just how you structure your enterprise agreements, right? Is a company negative cash flow or is it positive cash flow? Is it in a negative cash flow cycle or a positive cash flow cycle? So thinking through that. These are all honestly, it's probably a series of like 50 different decisions that lead to being capital efficient and high growth at the same time.
It's such a great example of coherence. We talk about how different cultures work, different companies work. It's not so much following every particular best practice, or even to say, far be it for me to say, okay, everyone should copy the way you did your contracts, and no one should ever enter into a negative cash, contract. Like, of course, there are those situations. But to me, what's interesting about the story is the way in which all these little decisions add up together to one coherent whole, where the parts, they support each other. And therefore, it's easier for people to acculturate. It's easier for them to understand, like, what is my part in this story, when everything is coherent, versus when you have different departments making different decisions. And I'm curious, what did you do to kind of ensure that cultural cohesion? That's not an easy thing to achieve. Certainly once you cross 100 employees, even at 50, it's pretty challenging to get everyone rowing in the same direction, make sure everyone understands what are the values here. How did you manage that?
Yeah, absolutely. So you're right. It wasn't sort of easy to do, but the things that we put in place was Roman and I wrote down our values like very early on. So we talked about the world positive investor, which led to, by the way, the world positive term sheet. So James Joaquin had us write down our mission and vision. But we'll
link to that. That's actually a really cool template term sheet. We'll link to it in the show notes.
Yeah. So just the backstory here is that before James would wire the money, he said you have to fill out the world positive term sheet. And I'm like, what? what are you talking about? And essentially he required us to write down our mission, vision, and values. And at the time I'm like, oh my God, look at this investor. Like, why is he asking me to do more work? But like, in hindsight, I'm really glad he asked us to do that. And so we had written down our values, right? And the company values include things like customer obsession, do whatever you can to delight users, It includes things like speed, like move as quickly as humanly possible. It includes values like ownership, like everyone needs to act like a CEO, like the buck stops with you, like and it also includes the value of deliver results, like focus on inputs and outputs and deliver results. So there were a couple of values in there that really enabled the capital efficiency, I would say. Like first is the speed one, like just move quick, ship quickly, like which forced every team to operate in an efficient manner and in a rapid manner. And if there were any slowdowns or anything, like we got to nip that in the bud quickly. We also have a company value called be resourceful. So what that means is that, of course, we're going to spend, if we got to invest and spend and build a new team and so on, we're going to do that. But we're going to operate the company as close to cash flow positive at all times as well. So we're going to be careful with our spending. And that's an embedded company value too. So these are just sort of a few of the kind of, I believe values are the operating system of the company. They're how we work together. They're how we make decisions, and they define our culture. And so embedded in all that, in some of those values, is delighting users, but also being capital efficient.
A lot of companies, and I made this mistake too, you write down your values. And I mean, it's so great to have an investor that requires you to do that. That's a classic thing people overlook and think they'll put it off till tomorrow, and then tomorrow never comes. And then your values wind up being what they turn out to be. You discover what they are, and sometimes you're horrified to find out. But another mistake I see a lot of founders make is they write down the values and then there's just a piece of paper. It's not actually embedded into the operations. It doesn't become the operating system. And a lot of companies, there's this hypocrisy where the stated values and the kind of real actual operating values are in tension or even in conflict. And the employees come in and they say, oh, I got it. You want me to be pretending to do this one thing while actually doing this other thing? Like, okay, I guess that's what this company wants. And they do all kinds of insane ththings. How did you prevent it from becoming just a poster on a wall, but like really embedded into the organization?
So I learned this early on from Pete Flint, who's the founder and CEO of Trulia. That values actually have to get implemented, right? And otherwise, they will just end up being, like you said, a poster on a wall and meaningless. There are three main ways to implement your values. Number one is hiring. So when we have pretty robust hiring at Incredible Health, and we have interview questions that are designed to evaluate someone's values. So essentially, you are self-selecting for individuals who already embody your values when you're hiring. So that helps a lot. So the second piece is during employee onboarding. So we take onboarding here pretty seriously as well, and during onboarding, there is a review of the mission, the vision, and the values. It's almost like their indoctrination, like welcome to the cult kind of thing that happens with every single team member that joins, regardless of team. And then finally, it's in performance reviews. So performance reviews aren't just about like, hey, did this person or this team or this leader deliver outcomes? It's how well did they embody, this set of values? And we even this is also part of performance reviews. Like we even have awards now, right? Where there's like a quarterly award for like the person at the company that like embodied the value the most, right? With examples and so on. So we sort of, those are the main ways we implemented them.
That's so important. Companies so neglect to do that because, we've talked in other interviews in this series about this idea of the culture bank, that your culture is an asset if it's coherent. And so whenever you defend the company's value, whenever an employee does something that's in defense of a value, maybe even if it comes at the expense of something that's meaningful to them, or even at the expense of sacrifice on behalf of the company, but for the value, that's like making a deposit into the culture bank. And whenever you talk yourself into the expediency of doing the reverse, that's kind of like making a withdrawal. And the way you build a culture bank is you only make deposits, you never make withdrawals, and then you have a strong culture company. And most CEOs that I talk to about this, they cringe at that last part. They're like, never make what it's so you should. That seems like a really high standard to set. I'm like, well, you're the one who told me you wanted to have a strong culture. And a really important part of that is then to turn those stories into a guide called the leader's guide for the organization. Like actually tell those stories so people know it's not just words on a page. Here's examples of times when leaders in this company did the right thing. A classic is like did the right thing for a customer, even though it was inconvenient or even expensive for us, or where we were in the wrong, so we admitted it instead of being defensive. Or in your case, like here's a case where someone was actually resourceful and found a way to accomplish the $1 million project, for $10 instead. And that's a huge benefit. So I'm curious if any of those stories come to mind of like a time when a leader or just any employee embodied the value, did something surprising, faced a situation where they could have done the expedient thing and didn't? What comes to mind?
Yeah, I mean, we have lots of stories here. I'll share one from our talent advocate team. Our talent advocate team is a team of individuals who think of them as like career coaches for the nurses. So they help them with interview preparation, they help them evaluate offers, and so on.
Sure.
And that team is just so customer obsessed. Like, it's just awesome. Like, the stories coming out of that team are, sure, I helped a nurse, get a job and so on. Like, that's like baseline. But, I also, she wanted to relocate to, LA and was really struggling with figuring out housing. So like I sent her some apartment listings, right? Or like this is like things that are completely outside of the talent advocate's job description, but they just wanted to be helpful. Or things like, nurses work all kinds of odd hours, right? And, our talent advocate team is sort of a 9 to 5 or 8 to 6 team. But sometimes a nurse needs to speak like late at night, like really nervous about an interview the next day. And so the talent advocate goes out of his or her way to speak with that nurse at 9 or 10 p.m. to calm her down, coach her, walk through the interview questions, do some practice, et cetera, so she feels confident for the next day. So those are just like a few examples of just customer obsession, not from leaders, but from the individuals, the front lines of this company.
Do you have other examples for other values? I'm like a collector of these things. So tell me some stories.
Yeah. On the example of the sort of the speed value, I have a fantastic engineering and product leaders, and they're always tweaking their processes with product development, not just to enable quality, but also to enable speed. Now, obviously, in product development, everyone's heard of things like code reviews, and we use this process called shaping, which we actually borrowed from Basecamp. And when we are shaping, there is a specific section of that document called the appetite, right? Where you have to actually definitively say like how many weeks of development time or days of development time is this worth to the company? Not how long does it take to build it, but how much is this worth to the company? And then you sort of time box it. And then decide what the solution is for the problem that you're trying to solve. And so with that process change alone, I mean, they just not just accelerated the speed and embodied the speed value, but they improved the deliver results value because what they were shipping was higher impact. So that's another example from another part of the company.
What about a time when you really had to make a sacrifice on behalf of the company, either for a customer or for an employee, like to do the right thing when it was costly or unpleasant? I know so many companies went through this in the pandemic. Healthcare was so crushed during that time. And I remember, I think it was actually Mark Cuban who gave me this advice of all people. And he was saying, in a pandemic, like companies really reveal their true colors, not in any kind of crisis. That's really when you find out who you can trust and what people stand for. And people have long memories for that kind of thing.
They do.
The people that stood with you when it was hard are the people you're going to remember. That's going to be a company you're going to reward with your business in the good times, et cetera. And I'm curious though, if there's moments like that stand out to you where you really had to take a stand or do the right thing at a time when it was either unclear what the right thing was or what was especially difficult to do.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree with you that users and customers in general, whether it's consumer or enterprise, they have long memories, right? And so they remember how you operated during times of crisis. When the pandemic first hit, all hiring stopped. I don't know if you guys remember. If you remember that time, it was I
remember it well.
It was, I think the governors of most states were asking their health systems to stop providing services and just like make sure that there's enough room for the COVID patients, right? It was also a period of intense financial instability for hospitals and health systems as well. And so overnight, all hiring stopped on the platform. And that, technically, legally, that is a violation of all our contracts with these health systems. But we took the approach of like, hey, we understand. We're here for you. Like the contract is still in place. We're here for you when you're ready. And they remembered that. And they remembered that we gave them grace for several months when it came to until they had, things were a little more stable. And then hiring actually came back with a vengeance after that, right?
Of course,
and they remembered, and we were like their vendor of choice, right? So that's that's just like one example. Just do what's right for your customers at the end of the day.
This episode is brought to you by Runway. You ever feel like you're the only one who gets your company's numbers? Like, really gets it? Explaining it to other people can feel like a drag. It's unbelievable to me how many founders, their team doesn't understand how the business works. Well, that's where Runway comes in. It's not just for you, it's for your whole team. By integrating with hundreds of tools to pull in your data, having everything in one place makes it much easier for the whole team to understand how their individual decisions impact the overall business. This is how you build metrics you can believe and you can trust. It's all drag and drop, everything updates instantly, you get real-time investor reports, and everyone can play with the model. When people understand the model, they make smarter decisions. If you want to see how Runway can give your team the clarity they need, head to runway.com/Eric for a demo and your first 2 months free.
The other thing I'm curious about as you've scaled is this is a high purpose company. You have this really intense mission to do right by this critical community of people that are so important to our economy and to the care of so many patients. Yet you hire people who come from different industries. You must be hiring people who've worked in a conventional healthcare company. I think about the trauma that people have had working at some of these horrible health systems. You must be pulling people in from, finance and tech companies that don't especially have an ethos of care, that are not really aligned with that. So you're doing your indoctrination, but how have you helped actually structure people's decision making so that they come back to that purpose as a touchstone, and you can be confident that they're making the right decisions when you're not there, not just to, aggrandize the company and be selfish on your behalf, but to really make sure that the mission comes first?
It's awesome question. Like I'm a big believer in hiring a diversity of backgrounds, and believe that makes for stronger teams and a stronger company. Because at the end of the day, it's the ideas that come from that diversity of backgrounds that lead to more innovation and more progress and more results. So the way we sort of implement, the values in the decision making is we try to keep each other accountable, right? So in that employee onboarding step, we also say like, hey, these are the company values. We all need to live by them, but you have full authority to call out your peers, your leaders, et cetera, when they are not following the values, right? And I'll just share examples just from myself when I get called out, right? Mm-hmm. We have a company value called disagree and commit. That means, that's the one about like, hey, we need to debate. We need to, no one should be quiet on these calls, whether it's a team meeting or a one-on-one or whatever. We need to debate, because that's how you ultimately make the best decisions for the users or for the business. Now, the debate does need to come to an end, and we all need to commit. And so even if you disagree, you need to commit, because we need to make a decision and move on, like because of the speed value, right? And so there have been times where like I try to rehash a decision like 2 weeks later. And the team members are like, okay, where's your commit? You're doing disagree, but you're not doing commit, right? And so it's great. And I'm like, I love that. I love being being held accountable to the company values. And so if they have full ability to do that with me, I mean, they can do that with anyone at the company, right? Yeah. And so we try to keep each other in check. At the end of the day, the values are aspirational. They are difficult to live by at all times. And so by encouraging each other to just like stick with them, we end up having decisions that are aligned with the values.
The flip side of coherence in culture is integrity. And getting a company to act with high integrity is a really difficult management challenge. Those who've tried can attest this is not an easy thing, partly because, you have to create this alignment internally, but also because you face external forces. You have vendors, that maybe who pressure you to do one thing or another, or you have investors, of course, who, can sometimes go from fearful to, fearful and they don't want to invest. And next thing you know, they're greedy and they want to cash in their chips, as soon as possible. And some investors alternate back and forth. Not everyone is high conviction, world positive like James. But I'm curious, what are the steps you've taken to kind of protect that culture from these outside forces? How do you make sure that everyone, all of the broader ecosystem the company touches, is aligned around this goal?
Yeah, we're just really selective about who we work with, and I'm talking about every constituent, right? I'm referring to investors, customers, employees, our vendors, etc. Let's just talk about investors for a second. So we I've raised about $100 million for this, just under $100 million for this company. The company's valued at 1.65 billion. We've done a seed, a Series A, and a Series B. All of those rounds were oversubscribed, multiple term sheets, etc. That puts myself and Rome, right, in a position where we can be very selective about who we work with. Mm-hmm. Now, when it comes to there's the obvious criteria for who to work with. Like, we definitely have a bias for Bay Area investors for a variety of reasons, which we can talk about. We also, in the first couple of rounds, definitely had a bias for technical software investors and for marketplace investors. Also, I'm a big believer in working with investors that are former operators and former CEOs, because the quality of the advice you get is actually a lot higher. But integrity was evaluated at that time too. And the way we evaluated that was I spoke with CEOs, like backdoor reference calls, right? Including CEOs whose companies like crashed and burned. And it's like, you ask, like, hey, when everything was going wrong, and I know you ended up shutting down the company and so on, how did this investor behave? Mm-hmm. Like, what happened during that time? And if you hear like they went ballistic, right, and they didn't have my back, then like, you might have an integrity issue and you should probably move on.
Were you ever tempted by like a higher term sheet from someone who didn't pass the reference check, or someone with a big name and, a higher profile investor? I feel like that's a very seductive part of the process.
Definitely. Very tempted. But at the end of the day, just remember that we got to work with them for 10 plus years. You cannot end that relationship. And it's very hard to exit an investor. But ended up working with just like really, really high integrity investors. So we talked about James Joaquin. The other investor I work with closely is Jeff Jordan at Andreesen Horowitz, who's like, I call him the master of marketplaces, right?
He knows marketplaces better than anybody.
Yeah, he knows it really well. He was this, not only is he was a CEO of OpenTable and a leader at eBay and early investor and board member at Pinterest and Instacart and Airbnb. So he knows marketplaces. He's been doing it since like the late 90s, right? But when you do the CEO reference calls on Jeff Jordan, you hear things like, he's a prince among men. I'm like, who says that, right? or hey, when my company was just going terribly and he always had my back. That's the kind of feedback that you want to hear.
Yeah, investors would do well to learn from that example. I wish more of them would, because founders have long memories too, and they do talk.
They do. Yeah.
Talk a little bit about the future. What are you excited about? I know you've been, like everybody, grappling with the whole AI revolution as it passes through healthcare. Where do you see that going, and how has that affected the company so far?
Yeah, when I think about the future, there's probably two areas that are particularly exciting. One is our product strategy, which includes AI as well, and then our growth strategy. So on the product side, we are leaning into AI and already have multiple features that are user-facing features that are live. Like, for example, you have a resume wizard where nurses can use our AI to create resumes, because it turns out 30% of nurses do not have a resume or don't have a high quality resume, and so they're essentially left behind and can't enter the job search process. And now they can do it from their phones within minutes, right? And so that feature is about expanding opportunities for nurses using AI. Another one is when employers are sending messages or what we call interview requests to nurses, because on our platform, employers apply to the talent instead of the other way around. We are now using AI in that. And so that gives the employers the opportunity to automatically, at scale, like really differentiate themselves from the competition, because we can highlight key attributes and perks that make them different from their competition. Mm-hmm. That has resulted in an interview request accept rate from nurses that has increased by 20%. So 20% more nurses are now accepting interview requests just because of this generative AI text. So those are just a few examples of that. And I think it's a very exciting technology. I mean, not without its problems. We have to take the QA piece very seriously. We have to take the hallucination and the bias pieces like very, very seriously as well. And like, there's still some aspects of this technology that are not quite there yet. But overall, I found it to be really helpful. And so from our product strategy is really about expanding opportunity and about ensuring that the two parties transact very efficiently. And then we also want to just continue adding more free tools and services for nurses. So the entire marketplace is free for healthcare workers. And there's more value add, services that we want to add. Like I mentioned continuing education, which is already available in the community, and there's more coming. On the growth side, I mean, we are, expanding beyond hospitals, so we have a huge presence with U.S. hospitals. We work with 1,500 of them, including large health systems, community hospitals, academic medical centers, but, are just starting to expand into ambulatory surgical centers and other parts of healthcare too. And so there's more expansion into different categories coming.
Talk a little bit about what you found effective in integrating generative AI. I don't know a single executive on the planet who's not grappling with this right now. And a lot of enterprise deployments of generative AI have gone really badly. Yeah. Hallucinations, is the name brand one, but we've had issues with prompt injection, and I could go on and on. There's so many issues. And so the ratio of kind of whiz bang demos to actually successfully deployed applications is kind of bad. It kind of reminds me actually of the early days of waterfall software development before more modern techniques took hold, where just projects would be expensive and go catastrophically wrong pretty regularly. Like, what have you found effective for using this new technology to bring it actually into production?
Yeah, so we've learned a lot over the last, I guess, year and a half now, maybe almost 2 years. One is the MVP approach still applies. Right. So
thanks for saying so.
And then the other piece that we've learned is that there are downsides to this technology, and we operate in the enterprise space as well, and with a very conservative industry when it comes to hospitals. They're serious about cybersecurity and all of that as well. And so because there's downsides and risks to this technology, you have to put process in place, unfortunately, right, to accommodate for that. And so. No, the generative AI can't just go do whatever it wants. Like, we have a whole QA process before a single message goes out, right? For example. And hopefully as the technology matures, these things will get easier and better, but it's definitely an area that we've had to be careful with. The other areas, look, at the end of the day, when you have a highly intellectual, super, engaged engineering product data team, you want to let them explore, right? So we were pretty early on adding GitHub Copilot, for example. We were pretty early on getting the enterprise version of OpenAI, right? So people can, tinker around and experiment and so on. And so it's there's almost like a academic research component to this as well, where you gotta loosen the reins and allow your teams to explore, and then in a very MVP and low risk way, share that with your users too.
Strikes me that one of the most important assets you have as a company is your trustworthiness. At the end of the day, nurses have to trust you with their lives and their careers. You have these very demanding enterprise customers in highly regulated industries where, you're solving a critical problem for them, but also you could be a source of tremendous difficulty. You could really blow it up if it doesn't work. And, the QA responsibilities with the AI, it just really raises for me this feeling that you have to tend to that as an asset. And I'm curious, what were you able to do in the early days to get people to trust you when you were nobody? But also, how have you husbanded that asset and grown it as you've gone through the scaling process? When, of course, it's such the easiest thing for anyone in the company. Just the number one defect in the OKR system at most companies is that any person can boost their own OKRs easily by trading against the company's trustworthiness.
They can.
It's like a free resource available to every single person. And you got to say, look, I know there's a giant pile of gold sitting right next to you, but please don't take any of it home with you. Please build that asset instead of degrading it. How have you managed that?
Yeah, it's definitely an area that's, a really important area. And we've run into, there have been incidents where this has really tested us, right? So we have this company value called customer obsession, and that's do whatever you can to delight users, go above and beyond to earn your users' trust, right? So the word trust is embedded in the customer obsession value. Taking that value, and that value has also resulted in multiple principles across the company. I'll give you a specific example. We can absolutely boost our numbers by allowing more nurses into the marketplace to be put in front of employers, even if the nurses are not engaged or serious about their job search process, right? And
Oh, for
as you can
sure.
imagine, that really erodes trust with employers, okay? Because now they're speaking with nurses that are just like kicking tires and not that serious, and they're not showing up for interviews and so on. So it creates a really tremendous issues. We had to remember, like, hey, this isn't just about metrics and quantitative numbers. Like, we got to remember that there's a qualitative component to this as well, which is the user experience, right? And had subsequently, we added things like we call it our engagement algorithm, where we're able to detect based on the talent, based on the nurse's activity, if they're serious about their job search or not. And if they're not, then they can't be put in front of employers. And now this is now automated and algorithmic and so on. Now, the whole reason why we even created that had nothing to do with numerical outcomes. It all had to do with maintaining trust in the marketplace. And there's so many, product features and decisions that we make around this topic that, like, because the system can be gamed, to your point, right? The outcomes, the OKRs can absolutely be gamed if we're not remembering these more qualitative aspects like the customer obsession value. The other thing I have is, like, the other area I do to just keep this all in check is I have a fantastic data team. And, like, the data team is empowered to operate independently. If it was up to me, I wouldn't even call them the data team. They're like our audit team, right? Mm-hmm. They're like checking things, like checking decisions, checking experiments, So they help keep us accountable too, and keep every team accountable. They need to, when I'm interacting with them, I'm like, hey, I just need to get to the truth, right? Like, I don't care about the egos and the titles and, what all these other teams and leaders want. Like, I'm just trying to get to the truth. So having an independent data team also helps a lot.
How do you ensure their independence?
Be thoughtful about who they report to and how you're structuring that team. So
how you do it? Yeah. How do you do it?
I don't believe a data team should be embedded inside a product team, for example, or inside an operations team. I think they should operate independently and report to either, a CEO or a CTO, like someone who's, operating well. Yeah, they should be a centralized team, essentially.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Yeah, that makes sense. What about times when the different customer segments that you serve have come into conflict? I feel like it's like a classic thing that marketplace companies are like the point. Like, there's this like nebulous conversation about stakeholder capitalism. And I feel like so much of the stakeholder discourse is like, it's inane. It's like, oh, we got to serve. It's like very vague. And it almost seems like we're just going to compromise, it's like, take a little poison, a little food, eat it. You still got food. It's like, no, that's not how it works. We have to find ways to serve everybody that matters to our ecosystem in ways that everyone's better off than if we didn't exist. But that's so easy to say, really hard to do. Marketplace companies can't hide from that reality. You have it right in front of you because there's this Venn diagram of all the things that the employers want and all the things that the nurses want. And you hope it's a Venn diagram, not just headlights over here. You hope there's some overlap zone. You're always trying to find that. Talk about what it's been like when your values come into conflict in that way and you've had to resolve a situation where there's right on both sides.
Yeah. I mean, this actually comes up often, when we're engaging in enterprise discussions, right, with the health systems. We often get asked, like, hey, can I get the health systems asking, can they get exclusivity? Can they get access to the nurses first? Can they, they're trying to beat their competition, whether it's their local competition or their national competition. So I understand where the questions are coming from. But our response is always no, right? And it's like, hey, Incredible Health, we're like Switzerland. We're neutral. And the vision of the company is to help healthcare professionals live better lives. It's to help them find and do their best work. So we're here to make sure that nurses are getting hired at their dream jobs. And so that means we do need to treat all employers the same, and all employers need to have the same access to the platform. Now we can chat with you about what are the best practices for how to hire more than your competition, because we have lots of that data too. But we're not going to do something special from a structural standpoint in terms of giving you first dibs and exclusivity and so on. Right. So
talk a little bit about how you prioritize. At the end of the day, you have all these business goals You have these things that you've promised to investors that you want. You have the things that nurses want to make their lives better. You have the things that employers want that would make their lives better. And those things, I can imagine lots of situations where it's not just a two-way conflict, but it's a multi-way conflict. Everybody would like to have, power over the other. Everyone would like to have first dibs. Everyone would like to have exclusive access. I'm sure if you auctioned off, access to your data, to the highest paying employer, you would do it. I'm sure there are employers who would love if you would not allow their own nurses to search for other jobs, once they're on your platform and be excluded from the opportunities.
Yep.
I could just think about all the crazy
those
things.
All come up. Those are all real.
Yeah. I mean, I'm just imagining, but I have been around a lot of marketplaces over the years, and I can't tell you the number of times I've pitched reforms of various kinds and have one stakeholder say everything about that sounds great, except for the part where I have to do something. How about you just make everybody else do something and leave me alone, and I get all the benefits? It's like, well, interestingly, that's what the other guy said too. But don't listen to him. You should listen to me instead. That's like such a classic. So yeah, how do you prioritize? Like, how do you decide which things among all the things you could be doing, all those different pressures and conflicts? How do you decide what the most important couple of things are?
Yeah. So I can answer this question in a couple of different ways. So first, when it comes to like the behavior of the users, and we try to make it really clear to everyone that you're joining a community. You're joining the incredible health community. And in fact, we make all our users, whether it's nurses or employers, or sign our community standards. And the community standards, basically binds them they all agree to some kind of behavior. Like, for example, you can't no-show interviews, you can't ignore talent, you can't ignore an interview, you can't, there's just like basic behaviors that we ask them to sign. On the topic of prioritization, I honestly think the overall topic of prioritization it's a skill. And it's part of our be resourceful value. Like, if as a leader, if you're really good at prioritizing, then you've become a more resourceful leader. Because ideally, you want to make sure as an individual, and then certainly the company overall, you want to focus the time, the energy, the attention on like 2 or 3 things. As soon as you increase it to like even 5 or 7 things or 15 things, like you basically have set everyone, yourself up and everyone else up for failure, right?
Yeah.
Because usually teams can do and leaders can do a few things very, very well with speed and with quality. But as soon as you put too much on their plate, one of those is going to suffer either speed or quality. And so and I've experienced this, like, just like this is all trial and error too. Every time I've set like 7 OKRs, like it was a bad quarter. Okay. But
multitasking is a lie. Yeah. The research is super clear on this point. There is no multitasking. Human brain can't do it.
Exactly. But when every time we set only 3 OKRs for a quarter, we do really well. Right. So it's just, and that's at the company level, like, let alone the individual level. Right. So it's just, there's so much research that backs us up that you have to like ruthlessly prioritize. And it's hard to do. And then the other thing is, like, I'm also in a position where I have to keep other leaders accountable to that too. So let's say I set the 3 and then they come with their pet projects, right? And I'm like, this doesn't fit into the main 3, right? So they also have to be very disciplined in this area too.
One of my fundamental beliefs is that companies or organizations, actually, of all kinds, are super organisms. Like, they're actually as alive as you or me. Yep. And we don't create them or own them so much as we give birth to them. And then they have their own independent reality. They have their own values and their own North Star and their own moral compass. And I'm curious if that resonates with you, and if, as you've gotten bigger, you're starting to cross that threshold of size where I feel like these issues start to really become very clear. That there's like the choices you make as an individual person, your prioritization, your choices, your accountability for you and your team. And then there's this other thing going on where the company as a whole has its own priorities and its own goals and its own rhythms, which you have a lot of influence over, but it's not the same as it just obeys your commands. And I'm curious if that resonates with you, and if that, well, as over the course of these 7 years, if your perspective on what you're actually making, where you initially start out, you're building a product, it's an MVP, it's a thing, it's a piece of software. As you get bigger, you start to realize you're making something different. What's that been like for you?
Yeah, I've gone through this evolution, and I feel like I'm still on the journey. Your early days, I'm just working on a product and working on building an early team. But now I have to think about building a company, right? And how and think about how we operate and how we're structured and so on.
Mm-hmm.
One of my hacks is I just meet with COOs and CEOs of marketplaces that are further along than ours. And I end up learning like so much from them. So things like, this whole concept in marketplaces around single threaded owners, right? So actually, I think it was Amazon that popularized this concept, where for every key metric, you should just have a single owner, and you should give them the authority to work cross-functionally and so on to drive that value, to drive that metric. There's things like the weekly marketplace review or the weekly business review that has needed to get implemented. There's a whole like data infrastructure that has had to get laid out in terms of just thinking through all the inputs and outputs, because marketplaces they're pretty complicated from a data standpoint.
Mm-hmm.
So I've had to like re-architect, restructure teams, leaders, what each person owns, what each leader owns, many times over. And I think that's going to continue for the foreseeable future. And I realize that that's actually normal. Like when I speak with the former CEO of Instacart or the former CEO of DoorDash or the CEO of Poshmark and so on, like everyone is like re-architects these things every couple of years. So it's just part of scaling, I guess. And so, yes, I do spend a lot less time on the actual core product itself. And I'm spending more time on how do we actually work together and make progress together.
You miss it?
I do a little bit, if I'm being honest.
we all go through it. Yeah. Well, don't worry. There's a next stage where you have to then get more obsessed and micromanage the product again as you go through these stages.
Exactly.
So you can look forward to that
and all that. Yeah.
Yeah. Brian Chesky's gone through that very publicly recently, so you can look forward to that in your future.
Exactly.
I want to do a lightning round of a couple quick ones, if it's okay with you.
Sure.
One of my favorite things about doing these interviews is I get to go read all the stuff you've written and other interviews you've given, and it's just you said a whole bunch of really interesting things that I want to ask you about, and there's no way to do it all justice. So lightning round, okay? One of my favorites, you said that you have to have 100% confidence, but you also, if you have 100% competence, then you become unstoppable. What did you mean?
The context of that was actually probably a question I was being asked around being a female CEO or a minority CEO.
Mm-hmm.
And probably one of the top pieces of advice that I give to my counterparts who are minorities or women is that you have to actually work on your confidence, and you have to be quite assertive when you're pursuing a vision, a mission, and you're often put in a position where you need to sell, right? That's the classic thing CEOs do. Like we have to sell to customers, to investors, to employees to join your company, to the press, et cetera. And so doing that with 100% confidence will actually lead to better outcomes than doing it with only 50% confidence. And of course, you have to be fully competent as well. So if you have both, like it is a magical combination. And so if you're out there listening to this and like you're struggling with things like self-esteem and self-doubt and imposter syndrome and so on, which is, by the way, something that we all struggle with, even, I'm sure the men struggle with it too as well, right?
I can attest, yes.
That is an area to focus on in terms of your own, not just your personal development, but even your professional development. Because it can pay a lot of dividends later.
Yeah, I appreciate you saying that. And look, the reality of the double bind and the double standards in how entrepreneurs are judged. I mean, it's really, the research is there, but it's also really obvious if you just look with your eyes and talk to people who've been through it. And whenever I'm mentoring folks who come from an underrepresented background, they're always shocked when I tell them that among like venture entrepreneurs who pitch investors, I'm considered to be not confident enough. And like, I come across like, you should like give me that same advice. And it's like, wow, people are like, oh my God, you don't seem like a person who has confidence issues. And yet like, what's that next level? And there are these people who are almost at like a sociopathic level of charisma and pitch ability. And I love that you tied it back to competence too, because we've built this system that really rewards people that put on the black turtleneck and like put on this incredible show. And it's not always backed up by reality, and competence can be overlooked. And I think actually one of the reasons the data shows so conclusively that diverse teams, outperform and diverse founders outperform is simply that like it's the perversity. It's like the other side of this being held to a higher standard. So that isn't right. We shouldn't do that. But for those investors that have the brains to figure it out, that's actually an opportunity that they can capitalize on.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
I don't want to ask you about what it's like to deal with I'm sure you've had to deal with, with racism and stereotypes and stuff. And I feel like it's such a shame. Like, I feel like the people who need to be asked about that are the people who are doing that behavior, not the people who are on the receiving end of it. So I mean, if people are not clear about that, wake up and go look at the data, honestly. But I'm curious if, I've heard you say in other interviews that part of what you hope with your success here is to have an impact on the tech industry itself. And certainly on issues of representation and diversity, it has been very slow progress that's been made. I'm curious, just how do you feel about that? How do you see your role in driving that change, and what do you hope to see in the future?
Yeah, I mean, I think my role in it, and as well as my co-founder Roman Portlock, like, we, by being successful, we're we're also, that's like the best way we can help, honestly, like, because then people read about it or listen to this podcast and so on. Like, it's about like, you got to model the success, right? And just do that alone, I mean, which is hard enough, and you're going to influence a whole group of a whole community as a result. As far as just like, if you are in that category, like in my demographic, I have so many hacks at this point. Like,
how to
deal with it. I'd love to share a few. So, number one is that we know that the bias is there. It's structural. The data shows it, et cetera. But like, you actually have to compartmentalize that and like suppress that in your brain, and just like focus on being assertive and delivering your vision and your mission, right? Because the truth is, your white male counterparts are not even spending they're not spending their mental energy on structural issues, structural bias in the venture capital system. Like, they're not, right? And so you just want to make sure you're not at a disadvantage by like over focusing on those issues. The other hack is that when it comes to fundraising in particular, I only pitched and interacted with investors who already had a track record of funding women or funding minorities. Like, and it's easy to look up their track record,
that's
right?
Very easy to find out. Yeah.
That's like the biggest tell, right? So if the investor is only invested in white men, then I'm like, okay, cool. We're not going to talk then. Just move on. Like, there's such a huge number of investors in this country. Like, you're not like, you don't have to deal with those that are just.
You do not have to put up with that behavior.
You don't have to you don't have to deal with it at all. So those are just, a few of the hacks I've learned along the way. The other piece is just like, have a really awesome support group. I mean, this is applicable to all founders, all CEOs. Like,
of course,
at the end of the day, like, what's probably the number one thing that got me through the last 7 years is the network of founders and CEOs that I'm part of. And at the end of the day, we can empathize with each other. We can get advice from each other, so, and everyone's going through sometimes very similar challenges. So, like, stay connected with your founder and CEO friends.
I've heard from so many white male investors who claim that they can't be biased because nobody applies to their program from those groups. And it's like, they can't even they have not even the rudimentary empathy to realize that someone who can see who they've backed in the past is going to opt out of applying to them for obvious reasons. And so it's such a good example of how, if you want to, people talk about building a meritocracy, but they don't do the work to actually build it, and how the signaling effects are substantive. It matters not just what you do, but also what you say you're going to do. And transparency is also really important there.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, this applies to hiring too. I mean, when I think about, I don't know, just take an example, like our engineering team, you have to make sure that the first few include women, right? Because by the time we're trying to hire engineer number 20 or 30 or 50, when I'm trying to hire that star female engineer and she looks around and there's like, if it's all men, like, she's not going to join, right? Like, so you have to think about these topics early on, to make sure you don't incur this, I call it diversity debt, right?
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Yeah. It's not just the right thing to do, but also a competitive advantage. What do you wish these other gatekeepers, like, I feel like you've shared your hacks of how you have to navigate around the kind of imbecilic nature of the system. But if someone was in that system and they woke up one day and they realized, oh man, this isn't really right, what do you wish they would change? If you could pick something to just make it a little more fair.
I mean, a couple of things. One, I would encourage them to understand the research, right? And
Yeah, just look at it, for God's sake. I know.
Yeah, and look, we're in a capitalist society. We're talking about capitalism, right? So if you want to make more money, then you should probably back diverse founders because they make you more money. There's that research. The other piece is just think about your network and who you're engaging with. And so you might need to mix it up a little if you want to engage with more diverse people. If it's important to you, then set it as some kind of goal or metric. Just like anything else that you care about. Yeah, I mean, lots of tips for that group.
Yeah, thanks for saying that. Thanks for sharing. Kind of ties into something else I wanted to ask you about. You said the amazing thing about technology is that it can level the playing field. What did you have in mind?
I was thinking about Incredible Health when I said that. For a nurse to sign up and download our app and use our marketplace, and she's in Iowa, right? And through Incredible Health, she has access to opportunities all over the country. And if her dream is to move to New York City or Dallas, Texas, or San Francisco, California, or wherever, she can just do that. And she doesn't need a network. She doesn't need referrals. She doesn't even need to do much research, right? She just needs to create a profile and sit back and relax, right? And then employers are going to apply to her. That is an example of just completely leveling the playing field and democratizing access to opportunity. And I think that the world of employment should work like that in every industry. And of course, we're leading the charge in healthcare. There's just an enormous amount of value from that. Like when I think about my own job searches and how much networking I had to do and how I had to break into this community and like all this stuff, like it was a lot of work and not, and it wasn't, there were a lot of aspects to it that were not particularly fair either. And so, yeah, technology can level the playing field.
Someone listening to this is probably working in some other industry with an antiquated hiring and talent placement process. And maybe they could think to themselves, hey, that could be me. Yeah. Please go do it. It's such a disaster.
Yeah.
I want to talk to you about something you said, that moving to the US in 2009 was the biggest inflection point in your life.
It was.
I'm proud. It makes me proud to be an American, to be of a country that someone like you would want to come be a part of and have that reaction to. Talk about what it was like coming here. Why was it such a big inflection point for you?
It was such a big inflection point because the U.S. is the best country in the world, and I can't believe that happens to be a controversial statement. So I have to unpack it and explain it.
Please do.
Look, when it comes to opportunities, like let's say you're someone who works hard and you've got some skills and you're willing to pursue, grow your skills and your competencies, and you're willing to pursue opportunities. Like hands down, the U.S. is the best place to be, right? Like this entire country is designed for pursuing opportunities. And I'm referring to let's just talk about entrepreneurship, right? Like you can set up your company within minutes online. You can team up with anyone in terms of as co-founders. You have at-will employment. You can hire people, and if things don't work out, you can break up easily. When you are closing enterprise agreements, these are 2 or 3 page documents. They don't have to get notarized. They don't have to get approved by some government official. When you are trying to do business, you don't have to go to a gas station and hand someone an envelope full of money, right? Like I'm stating like real examples from other countries of what it takes to build a business, right? You have to, if you have an underperforming employee in Europe, they have to stay on your payroll for another 6 to 12 months. That stifles innovation, right? When you are in Germany, when you're trying to close large enterprise agreements, the government is involved in notarizing that document, right? When you are trying to get your goods released from customs in Dubai, you do sometimes have to show up at a gas station with an envelope full of cash. Like that is the US is just very streamlined when it comes to building businesses and transacting as a business. And it's just like amazing, right? And then there's also enormous networks of investors and networks of talent, and just the talent bar here is so high as well. And it's just amazing. And so if you're into that, then get to the US, right? And obviously if there's other things that you want to prioritize in life. Like for sure, this is not the best place for like work-life balance. And, you can argue about this may or may not be the best place to raise your children and so on. Right. But like, I'm just talking about like professional careers and academic pursuits or economic pursuits. Like, it's just amazing.
I appreciate you saying that. Like I said, it's nothing makes you more patriotic than to hear that perspective on what this country is and can be. And I feel like so many of us that grew up in this country, we kind of take for granted the rule of law and the whole set of customs and institutions that make what you're describing possible. And I totally get it if you don't want to go there, but we are living through a time when that itself has become politicized and is up for debate and is kind of under attack. I'm curious how does it feel to be here at a time when maybe the things we took for granted about what it means to be America are under threat or have the potential to change? Yeah,
I mean, I'd encourage Americans to not take the system for granted. And government matters at the end of the day. It really does. I mean, I know many of us in this country are very apathetic about it. It's like, hey, we got this like economic juggernaut. It doesn't matter who's in power, et cetera. But, take it from someone who's lived in other countries. Like I've lived in Sudan, I've lived in Saudi Arabia, I've lived in the UK, like I've lived in other countries. And like, let's just take Sudan as an example. Like that is an example of failed government and like everything collapses, right? So it's just, you just can't take the system that we have here for granted. And it's not by accident, it's by design that we have the system. And there are many institutions and leaders and organizations and communities that are holding it all up. And so we just want to make sure that it doesn't, disintegrate, because it can disintegrate overnight.
I appreciate you saying that. And there's so many lessons from history. People need to take this time very seriously. So I'm glad you encourage them to do so. Well, I have to say, this has been just a delightful conversation and so inspiring to me on so many different levels. Like I said, as an American, thank you for coming to this country and building this company, as someone who cares a lot about the healthcare system and knows a lot of doctors and nurses. Thank you on their behalf for taking care of them. And you don't know this, not commonly known, but one of the very first startups I ever created was a talent marketplace where the employers had to apply to the talent versus, it was a total .com era flame out. It never worked, but I've always had a soft spot in my heart for those kind of marketplace businesses. I know how hard they are. And I just have a real appreciation, real admiration for everything you've built. So, Dr. Abuzeid, thank you for taking the time to share a story with us.
Thank you so much for having me. This was really fun.
You've been listening to The Eric Ries Show. The Eric Ries Show is produced by Jordan Bornstein and Kiki Garthwaite. Research by Tom White and Melanie Rehack. Visual design by Reform Collective. Title theme by DB Music. I'm your host, Eric Ries. Thanks for listening and watching. See you next time.